All right. So let's get into the Electoral College. Yesterday, we spent a little bit of time watching a video on the Electoral College and, kind of the reasons why the founders put it in. So let's kind of just re-go over it, make sure we're on the same page. So the people don't technically actually elect the president. The Electoral College is essentially all of the representatives made up in our country. We have a total of 535 right now. We have 100 senators. We have 435 people in the House of Representatives. And then we have 3 extra people from Washington, D.C. They do not have any representation in the government, in the House of Representatives, but they do get electoral votes. So we have a total of 538 votes, essentially, that the president running is trying to get. All right. Not the popular vote. So essentially, the candidate that gets the most votes in a state gets all of the state's electoral votes. All right. So I want to look at electoral map in 2016. Maybe they have it for this. Let me see. For 2020. I think that'd be awesome if they do. No, not that. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. We'll just use the 2016 map because all I have is projections at this point for 2020, what they will look like. But yeah, let's go with that. Okay. So I know you're not done copying, but I do want to share this tab just so you kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. So if you see the number underneath all the states, so like under New York, we have the number 29, California 55, Texas 38, and then like Wyoming, you have 3. The least amount of electoral votes you can get for a state is 3. So these states here, like North Dakota, South Dakota, Rhode Island, excuse me, not Rhode Island, Delaware, all right, they only have 3 electoral votes. So essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to win a state. All right. 48 out of the 50 states, if you win the popular vote in that state, you get all of the electoral votes. So let's say, what's a good example here? This is just a projection. This is not how the election went. I just want to show the numbers. Okay. Let's say Trump wins 56% of the vote in Arkansas. Okay, which is right here. He's going to win 6 electoral votes for that state. If Biden wins Alabama, he's going to win 9 electoral votes for that state. Only Maine and Nebraska, you could actually get a portion. It actually splits. So you can win 2 and 2 or 3 and 1. But generally, all of the states, you're going to win the amount of electoral votes that they have. And to give you an example, Oklahoma, which is right here, number 7. All right. What they basically have they have 5 people in the House of Representatives and 2 senators. Therefore, 5 plus 2 is 7. Therefore, they get 7 electoral votes. New York has 27 people in the House of Reps and 2 people in the Senate. Therefore, they get 29 electoral votes. Okay. So the reason why I'm showing you this is you're trying to win a state's vote, so to speak. Okay. And therefore, you'll get all of their electoral votes. All right. You're not trying to get the population of all the people. All right, so back to the notes here. All right, so let's look at why, because it kind of goes against the notion of a democracy, right? We have this notion where like, okay, well, just take the majority of people that want something and the way they vote is the way we should do something. But the Founding Fathers put in the Electoral College into Section 2 of the Constitution, Article 2, because they realized that we had what's called population density problems. So back in American history, states like Virginia, Massachusetts, and New York, I think, those 3 states had the biggest populations. So essentially, all you had to do was win like 60 to 70% of the popular vote in those 3 states, and those 10 other states back in American history didn't matter. You didn't have to campaign there. All right. So why was it put in our Constitution? This was put in our Constitution to make sure every single state, no matter how small, we're talking like Rhode Island, Delaware, Montana, right, has more of a say in an election. All right. So the founding fathers understood that we need to have as much. Every state needs to matter. Every person in every state needs to matter. So they thought the Electoral College was the best way to try and go about actually having the most representation in a presidential election. Okay. If you just use the popular vote, like I said, you would just have to go to a couple different places. I think I mentioned this yesterday. If you win 80% of the vote, if you're running for president in 2040, let's say, okay, if you guys want to run for president, all right, all you would have to do is win 80% of the vote in New York, 80% of the vote in Texas, 80% of the vote in California. If you win 80% of the vote in those 3 states, you cannot receive a single vote from the 47 other states, and you would win. Okay, so the Electoral College forces you to make sure that you're winning the majority of 20, 25 states to make sure that you get the most overview of the election. All right, but as you can imagine, the other side is there's going to be many critics with this too, and we'll look at why, because there's been 5 presidential elections that you're going to learn about where the winner of the popular vote did not win the actual presidential election. Okay, so we'll talk about those reasons why. The critics would say the winner of the popular vote is the most popular president in the country, most popular person, therefore they should be the president. They think it's unfair. And it goes against a lot of what we would do in the House of Representatives and the Senate. When we went to vote, 98% of the way we vote is we're voting on whoever gets the most votes becomes that particular leader. So when you're voting for your people in the U.S. Senate, the majority of votes wins. When you're voting for people in the state assembly or the mayor or the governor, the most amount of votes wins. Only the presidential election is using the Electoral College. But with that being said, this is the only person you vote for where every single person's vote from the country comes into play. If you're voting for the New York governor, it's only people from New York State. So that's a lot more realistic to get all of those votes together and to campaign in all of New York State. If you want to campaign in an entire country back in 1800, it was nearly impossible. All right. So even now, 2020, it's tough. So back when there weren't planes and there weren't cars, it was even harder. Okay. Please write in the chat if you need a little more time to finish copying this down. We're going to look at a couple of pictures, diagrams, and some memes to kind of show you both sides of it. Depending on who you talk to, I'm trying to stay as unbiased as possible. Some people like the Electoral College, some people don't. My opinion doesn't really matter. Most people's opinions don't really matter. It's whatever you guys think, all right, should elect the president. But I'm trying to present both sides of it as unbiasedly as possible. All right. So Josh needs a little more time. No problem. We'll give a little more time. And then probably like around 10:40, we stop this lesson and we go to our next lesson, which is Federalism. There will be, don't freak out, a mini quiz tomorrow, something like 8 or 9 questions. Not a big deal. I think it's 8 questions. That's going to be on the lesson we're about to do because there's a lot of terms, and I want you guys to be a little bit, I want you to study them up a little bit, and we're going to take a little mini quiz tomorrow. All right, 30 more seconds. Mini in my class, Maheen, is 8 questions. The quiz is like 20 questions. The test is like 40, 50. All right. But it's all going to be, you're going to have your notes in front of you. It's not going to be overly tough. Okay, this isn't math class. Don't worry. This is going to be like a multiple choice question. It's not going to be worth a lot of points, I promise. All right. So let's go on to this whole idea. Okay, so we see all this video already, but this was in the 2016 election. Okay, so you guys were in 4th grade at the time. Probably don't remember much about it, but you were aware of what's going on. Clinton won by over 2 million votes when it was all said and done, the popular vote, but she did not win the election. Why? Because she did not win the electoral vote. Okay, and we'll kind of talk about some reasons why. So this was the 2016 election map, and this is kind of a good understanding of why you would maybe want to make sure you don't use the Electoral College. So the states in red, the districts in red are the districts that Trump won, which was 2,597, I believe, when it was all said and done. The ones in blue are the ones that Clinton won, which was only 486. But as you'd imagine, these areas like New York City, okay, like Los Angeles, okay, parts of California, like Miami, okay, those are very highly populated areas. So she won a lot of the votes there. So obviously she won more overall votes. But if you look at the election map, you will see that Trump and the Republicans had won a lot more of the overview, okay, the more of the landscape of the country. All right, so this is a good visual example of why you want to have the Electoral College in, because if you win this wide of a range of areas, it's maybe best that that person becomes president, so to speak. Okay. This is another good example of the election results. And even so, like, even though Clinton won the popular vote but lost all of these counties, she ended up almost winning. Okay, you needed 270 electoral votes. Do we have to attach these notes? Oh, no, Sanjita, don't worry about that. No, don't worry about that. All right, just continue your notes. So Trump, in this case, the goal is you need 270. He won with 290. Actually, I wanted to say it actually was more than that, but if you look at the actual popular vote, Clinton, at the initial count, had over 1 million popular votes. I think the official count became 65 million to 62 million when it was all said and done. All right. And what is kind of interesting, and not that you guys can vote in this new election coming up in 2020, what is amazing is something like 50% of the country didn't vote, which is kind of absurd. 50% of the eligible voters didn't vote. So there's this new election. Who knows what will happen if Biden or Trump's going to win? Honestly, your guess is as good as mine. But I will say it will have to do a lot with turnout and the amount of people that go out to vote. So we're not quite sure what will happen, but there's a very good chance. Again, I have a feeling that if Trump does win again, he may lose the popular vote again. And that's going to make things interesting. And we're going to make the Electoral College even more controversial. All right, but we'll see. That's literally 2 weeks from today. So we'll see what ends up happening. Okay, and these are two memes that kind of go about, reasons for and against. So this is reasons for the Electoral College. This is on the right, the reasons against. Essentially, the thought is if you lived in the blue zone, if you lived in a blue state, a blue area, which we do, New York City is like right here, and the Bronx is right there. If you lived in the gray areas, okay, then essentially your vote doesn't matter. All right, so you need to live in these blue areas for your vote to matter if you are trying to get the popular vote. Okay, so if you are living in a blue area, you have a high population area. So this is where, if we're just going by the popular vote, this is where the presidents would probably campaign and try and win the majority of votes in these blue districts and blue area. If you're not in that area, then their campaign will probably not come to you. But if you use the Electoral College, then hypothetically, the presidents have to come to all the areas. So a good example is right now they are campaigning in, I believe, in Michigan. Okay, Michigan's located right here, and it's this little bit of area as well. So there's only a few blue areas here. Okay, a few areas where there was a high population. So you can imagine this would be an area where the politicians really wouldn't go to, or the presidents wouldn't go to, if the Electoral College wasn't important. But since it is important, they do go to campaign places like this. The reverse is, and if you're someone who says the Electoral College is stupid, land doesn't vote. All right, so they're saying, like, there's not a lot of people here. There's not a lot of people here in the middle of the country. Why should their vote count so much as someone who's living in this blue, large blue area, so to speak? All right, that's where the concentration of people should be. So it's a very complicated thing. It's, should we have the Electoral College to vote for the president? Should we not? That's a debated thing. We've had it ever since we've had our Constitution. It's worked pretty much the entire time, but it's become a little bit more controversial over the past few years. All right. So this is a census. Okay. You guys need to copy down what a census is. Presidents campaign in states that agree with them no matter what. Presidents will campaign in states that agree with them no matter what. So yes and no. So I'll give you a good example. Joe Biden's going to win probably California. Okay. He's not really campaigning there. Trump is going to win Alabama. Why? Because these are states that have always voted Democrat or always voted Republican. Actually, California voted Republican in like the 1980s, but that has changed. But they're safe states. So, yeah, they're not going to probably campaign there. But places like Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, these are the big swing states. So that's where they're going to do most of their campaigns. I want to say the presidential debate. I want to just confirm there's a presidential debate this Thursday. I want to get you the location. I guarantee it's going to be in a swing state. Okay. It's in Nashville, Tennessee. Okay. So that is in a swing state that has voted Republican more often than it used to be, but it is there. Okay. So let's go through what a census is. Okay. So we've written this down already with the House of Representatives. The debate's at 9 p.m. Ashraf, I think, maybe 8. I will let you know on Thursday, though. You could look it up, though, if you need it. All right, I will certainly be watching. I was very disappointed how the last one went, not really because I was rooting for anyone in particular. I just thought they literally were acting like, both of them were acting like children up there. So let's hope they do a little bit better than last time. All right, so a census is a population count that happens every 10 years. We did one this year. All right, so the reason we do this is every 10 years we want to get the amount of representation, both the people in the House of Representatives and the electoral votes, okay, are going to do. All right, so here's a great example, okay? You see the population counts of New York, North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, right? They have the highest populations. Therefore, they're going to have the highest amount of electoral votes. So New York had 12. Okay, North Carolina had 12. Virginia had our biggest one, okay, 747,000. They're going to have 21 electoral votes. And then your smaller states like Kentucky, okay, or a small state like Delaware, okay, which is DEL right here, they only have 59,000, so they only have 3 electoral votes, okay? And this is going to change depending on the election that they go to, all right? So in 1800, yeah, in Rhode Island too, correct. So in 1800, these numbers will change. So let's look at the 1804 election after the 1800 census. So look at New York. New York went from 12 to 19. Well, infer what happens. New York has a higher population. More people moved to New York in this year, so they have a higher population. They're now at 19. Virginia, okay, as well, also is at 24. But take a look at, let's say, what's a good example? All right, good example here is, I'm trying to find one that goes down. But what you'll notice is because there's just a higher population from 1790 to 1800, there's going to be a different allotment of votes, okay? Because there's more people in the country, there's going to be higher electoral votes. So he went from having 176 electoral votes from 1800, where in 1792 we had 132. Right now, we're pretty steadfast at the number 538. That doesn't change, all right? But as elections have gone on in our country, we have had different electoral votes, okay? And here's a good example. Remember when we went over states and territories, right? Territories don't get to vote for president, so they don't get electoral votes, and they don't get people in the House of Reps, okay? So you do need to write this down. This is our last thing, our last slide that you're writing down. There have been 5 times when the winner of the popular vote did not win the election. Okay? And here are the winners. Okay? So you're going to have to write down the election of 1824. That was the first time. Okay? And you could write the name John Quincy Adams, which was John Adams' son. There have been 5 times when the winner of the popular vote did not win this election. So the John Quincy Adams, he lost the popular vote in the country, but won the electoral vote. Every other election that you see, and we have presidential elections every 4 years, right? The election of 2008, the election of 1892, the election of 1800. The president won the popular vote and also won the electoral vote. All right, but these are some unique situations where the winner of the popular vote did not win the election. Okay, so 1824 is the first time it happens. The election of 1876 we will certainly learn about in this class when we get to an area called Reconstruction. because this was a very controversial election where Rutherford B. Hayes is going to lose the popular vote to Samuel Tilden, but something happens for him to eventually win and eventually win the presidential election. So 1824, 1876. These are just some you have to just kind of commit to memory, okay, as best you can. The election of 1888 was another example. Benjamin Harrison becomes president. The most controversial election in American history is by far the election of 2000. I was a young kid when the election happened. I do remember it. We'll talk about it more in like May of this class. But that is another example where George Bush lost to Al Gore in the presidential election in the popular vote, but he won the electoral vote narrowly, 271 to 266. Like as close as you can have, literally, 271 to 266. And eventually he became president. All right. And then, of course, Donald Trump in 2016 lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton, but eventually, since he won the electoral vote pretty handily, he wins the election. All right. So you just got to write down the years 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016. I'll show you how a question on the Regents will come up with this in a second. Okay, here we go. So this is review. Just write in the chat like we usually do. To win a presidential election, a candidate must win a what? Oh, no. Oh, no. Yes, definitely not 3. Who cares about the popular vote? To win a 4 is correct. To win a congressional election, to win a mayor election, to win a governor election, that's the popular vote. The presidential election is strictly the electoral college vote. All right, so be careful with that one. What has been the most frequent criticism of the electoral college system? All right. Take a look at this one. Correct. 3. That's been the most frequent criticism. And if you go and listen to some current events, back in 2016, that was something that many people were upset about because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but she's not the president. Okay, that doesn't matter when you're going for the presidential election. Okay, the United States Constitution requires that a census be taken every 10 years to reapportion. Okay, so reapportion just means to divvy out where people go, where something goes. And so why do we have a census? There's 2 reasons for it. One of them is the correct answer there. We don't just vote, excuse me, we don't just have a census just to count the amount of people for no reason. What's the reason we do it? I see a 3, federal aid to localities. Nope, we don't really care about giving money to anyone at this point because of the census. Excellent, 1's the correct answer. We have to know how many people are going to be in the House of Representatives. So we need to see which state's going to have what. And if you look back to here, you could change this for membership for the Electoral College. You could change House of Representatives and Electoral College, and it's all the same stuff. Okay? So you'll see population change from New York. It went from 12 to 19. So they get more membership in the House and more people that electoral vote. How is the presidential election of 2000 similar to the presidential elections of 1824 and 1876? Excellent. 3. Okay, the winner of the popular vote did not become president. Are there any more? Yes, there are. Okay. Let's just keep practicing because this is a little bit of a review. Okay, let's just keep them going. A system of checks and balances was included in the United States Constitution because the authors were concerned about what? This is, I think you can answer this if you were in 7th grade. 1's the correct answer. Excellent. All right, that's not tricky. This one could be a little bit harder because now you have to kind of remember some of the checks. All right, which action is an example of the use of checks and balances? Excellent, also 1. Okay, the legislative branch can impeach the president. 2 is not a check. Choosing a vice president is something the executive branch can do. Election of the Speaker of the House by the majority party, that's something the legislative branch can do. And starting negotiations for a treaty by President George Washington, that is something the executive branch can do. Okay? So the best answer is 1. Last one, and then we go on to the new lesson for today. Which headline best illustrates the system of checks and balances? One is also correct. Nice job, guys. Okay, really good. Okay, the Senate's in the legislative branch. They are rejecting a judicial branch nominee. Okay, 2 is the state legislature fails to adopt a budget on time. State government has nothing to do with the federal government checks and balances. Congress votes to reduce income taxes. That is not a check or a balance. Congress controls the purse. They control the money, so they can reduce taxes. Heck, I hope they do that. Number 3 is great. I wish they did that, but that is not a check and a balance. 4, United States peacekeeping troops sent to Bosnia. That is not a check and balance, okay? The United States is able to send troops, okay? All right, so now you got to just, because we got 20 minutes left, you need to pretend like we have a new day setting up, okay? This new day is going to deal directly with federalism. As of now, we are focusing on, we've done the preamble, we've done the amendments, we've done Article 7, we've done Articles 1, 2, and 3. We are now looking at Article 6, federal power and federalism, okay? You have already written this down. If you want to write it down again, be my guest, but you're going to have to take a photo of it to do it. What is federalism? We've discussed this already under the Articles of Confederation, but now we're going to really dive into the differences between each area of our government. Now, I'm going to just tell you, you're going to get checks and balances and federalism confused. No matter how much I teach and how much I try and teach them differently, I think they're just so similar because you have like different groups in our federal government, executive, legislative, judicial, checking one another. And then in federalism, you have different levels of government. Okay, so we're really going to go through that. So just as a reminder, in our country, we have thousands of governments, thousands, okay? Tens of thousands, if you really look, over close to 90,000 governments in our country. A majority of them are local and city and town governments. So we have a city government that is run by Mayor de Blasio, and that is our city government. Some people don't live in cities. They live in towns. They live in counties. Okay, so they're going to have their own governments. We have 50 states, so there are more powerful than local governments, but there are state governments. So the New York state government is more powerful than the city government of New York. Governor Cuomo is more powerful than Mayor de Blasio. Okay? And then, of course, we have our one U.S. government, okay, which is the most powerful. However, what today's lesson is really focusing in on is what is the relationship between the federal government and the state government? In other words, what can the federal government do that the state governments can't do? And what can the state governments do that the federal government cannot do? So when we look at the relationship between the two types of government, so to speak. So don't do the do now. I'd rather you do this. Okay. So we need to analyze Amendment 10 from the Bill of Rights. So if you don't remember Amendment 10, I would write it back down and specifically underline the words that I underlined. Okay. So Amendment 10. Okay. What does this statement mean in our own words? All right. So Amendment 10. The powers, this is literally what the amendment says. The powers not delegated to the U.S. federal government are reserved to the state. So we have two terms here, two things that are underlined that are going to be rather important as you get into our final slide for today, because you'll see them come up. And if you kind of know what the words mean, you should be able to better understand. Okay. So the Constitution is going to be written down, and it's going to delegate what our federal government can and cannot do. So if I was to delegate to you to do something, I'm telling someone what to do. Okay? So if we were in class and I say, Muiz, I'm going to delegate you to be the one that closes the door when we leave, And then Ashraf, you're going to be the one that closes off the lights. I'm delegating you and telling you what to do. Okay? So the power is not delegated to our federal government. Okay? So if something is not written in the Constitution that tells our federal government what to do, then they're reserved to the states to decide. So if something's reserved, you have reservations. You've gone out to dinner before, I'm sure, right? You go for reservations. Okay, it's something that's there waiting for you. Okay, so they become your responsibility. If it's reserved for you, if a table's reserved for you, it's going to become yours. Okay, even though it's, in this case, if we're looking at the Constitution, that becomes a little bit complicated. All right. All right, so particularly this slide and then really the next slide, you're going to have open when you take your mini quiz tomorrow. If you take good notes and if you come to class on time, there's no reason why you'll get any of the questions wrong tomorrow, all right, especially because you have your notes out. Now, when I was in school, I kept this also open notebook. So if I happen to see you in school tomorrow, this will also be open notebook. And if we didn't have the pandemic, this would also be open notebook. So this is just an open notebook mini quiz, so to speak, coming up tomorrow. So this is the major thing, a major slide we have to write down. And it will be a lot. This may be one you maybe want to just take a photo of and then take your time and write it down for tomorrow. All right, but you definitely need to copy down these notes. All right, so last slide for today. Okay, it's a lot. Okay, so anything that's in a color besides black, you need to write down. Okay, anything in a color besides black, you need to write down. So you need to write down what the delegated powers are, the reserved powers, the concurrent powers. So when you get to Article 6 in our Constitution, yeah, gray, yeah. Oh, Milagros, yes. Shake out the hand a little bit. This is how it goes sometimes. All right. But let's go into, you don't have to do the gray. Okay, can you write down some examples? Sure. But you'll see when you get to the assignment that you're going to work on after this, the assignment's going to kind of break down a little bit more of the powers a little bit better. Okay. So if you read the Constitution, and we're not really doing that, I'm kind of summarizing what's in the Constitution, you're going to have what's called the delegated or the enumerated powers. These are powers that are given and written directly in the Constitution and are directly given to our federal government. So they basically list the things that our federal government can do. Now, you have to read throughout the entire Constitution to figure this out. So in Article 1, they'll talk about how the legislative branch has the power to print money. It will talk about how the legislative branch has the power to declare war. It will talk about how the executive branch has the power to run a postal service, okay, where they send mail. Okay, it specifically talks about and discusses the major details of the federal government. Okay, so what can our federal government do? I know you're not done copying. Just take a look at this. Okay, if you look at this, you have the national powers here on the left. These are the delegated powers, right? They are the ones that are going to declare war. They're the ones that are going to maintain the military. The state governments have no power to declare war. New York State cannot declare a war on Russia. New York State cannot run the U.S. military. Okay? That's a federal government job, and our Constitution says that's what our federal government can do. Okay? And for our people that were very worried about the federal government becoming too strong, in the Federalist Papers, they talked about how the Constitution is going to directly tell you exactly what the federal government can and cannot do. All right? What about the reserve powers? So Amendment 10 clearly states that anything not written in the Constitution becomes a power that the state government can decide. Okay? So what does that mean? All right. You have a New York State, like I have a driver's license, right? I have a New York State driver's license, okay? Nothing in the Constitution talks about having driving laws or having cars or having anything to do with issuing IDs. So that is something that's reserved to the states to do. So powers that are not delegated by the federal government are given to the state to decide, and that would be what Amendment 10 says. All right, so when you see reserve power, you think of it also as a state power. Okay? You're in a class called the New York State Regents class. You're taking a New York State test because our state government deemed that for us to check to see if the students know enough social studies to go on to college, they need to take this New York State Regents exam. When you go to Connecticut, or if you go to Arkansas, you're not taking the New York State Regents exam. Okay? By far the biggest issue, when you leave things up to the states sometimes, one of the biggest issues they left up to the states was slavery. Right? Slavery was a reserve power, is not written in the Constitution. Okay? So again, I know you're not done copying, but on the right here, okay, here's what the states could do. They could establish local smaller governments. They're the ones that set up the schools. You're in a New York City public school system. All right, this was set up by the state government. President Trump and the federal government doesn't have anything to do with our school. That's just the state governments. Okay? Cuomo decides, de Blasio decides if we have a snow day. Cuomo decides what the pandemic situation is going to be. That's not Trump. Okay? That's our governor and our mayor. They're the ones that are going to, if you want to get married, you have to go to town hall or to the city government or to the state to get married. Okay? So the states have different powers. And then, of course, you have the concurrent or the shared powers. So both the federal and the state governments kind of could do the same thing. So what's the biggest thing? Both. And I'll show you my paycheck eventually. I'm not going to show you it now, but I will show you that when you get a paycheck and you get taxes taken out, you're going to get a federal tax, which is going to go to the federal government, and a state tax, which is going to go to the state government. The state tax is going to help fund the state government, so you could have things like a free school, like you're going to right now, or a free lunch, okay? The federal tax will go to the federal government, so they can pay for things to like maintain the military, or maybe pay for some health care, okay? It depends where the money's going to, but they're both going to be a shared power, okay? If you commit a crime in New York, you will go to a state court. If you commit a crime across multiple states, like a great example would be a serial killer, right? Ted Bundy is a great example, okay? He committed murders in multiple states. Therefore, he would go to a federal court because he's going across multiple states and committing crimes across the country, right? But if you just commit a crime in New York State, you go to a state government. Correct, Rosemary, different jurisdiction, right? So they want to have a federal court system for that. Okay. So if you're looking here, shared powers, right? They can collect taxes, establish courts, control the banks. These things that both our federal government and our state government can do. Okay. And there's things that they both can do, and those are called concurrent powers. Now, here's the last thing, and it's the most complicated thing, but I think you'll become very familiar with it. It will be confusing today. It may be confusing tomorrow. But by the end of this class, you'll fully understand exactly what the implied powers means. Okay, so I'll put on my sweatshirt for this, all right, so you understand. Okay, when you have a sweatshirt, maybe some of you are wearing right now. You guys see this? Let me see my screen so I know I'm not, so you guys can see this. Okay, you see this? This is called elasticity. This is the ability to stretch. I'm pulling on this pretty hard right now, and this is not breaking, okay? So what we created in our Constitution, this is the last thing. This is maybe one of the beautiful things, one of the most beautiful things of our Constitution. The Founding Fathers understood that they can't figure everything out in that moment when they wrote the Constitution, right? So we've already looked at amendments, okay, so change or addition to the Constitution. But the elastic clause is extremely important because it's going to establish this idea that the powers not explicitly said in the Constitution still can be assumed to exist if needed. So if something happens over time and they believe that the federal government can take part of it, okay, that means that the federal government can take control if they deem it to be important. Okay? So this is called multiple things. It's called implied powers, meaning that we don't know it at the time, but eventually over time, it's implied that the federal government may get in control of this. The elastic clause, meaning that our Constitution's flexible. Okay, it's not rigid. It's not like if you try, it's not exactly what is exactly said in the Constitution means the federal government can't do it. There is some elasticity, there is some flexibility in the Constitution. Or it's also known as the necessary and proper clause. And this comes from the actual reading of the elastic clause, which says basically powers can be changed if it's necessary and proper for our country to do so. All right. So what are the biggest examples of this? Well, the biggest one you learned from 7th grade was purchasing land. There's nothing in our Constitution talked about if you want to buy land. Now, you notice our country goes from 13 states to 50 states. We've had to buy land at times, okay? And the way that we've done this is through the elastic clause. It gave our federal government the power to purchase land. It doesn't make sense for New York State or for California to purchase land. That's something our federal government should do. Another example would be gay marriage. Gay marriage used to be a state right. Okay, so if you went to Massachusetts, you could get married. Okay, but if you were in Texas, you were not allowed to get married if you were gay. Since 2010, though, because of the elastic clause, it is now a federal law, a federal rule, that if you want to get married in any of the 50 states, you can. That is from using the elastic clause to the federal government's advantage. So the implied powers give the federal government a little bit more power than the state government as well, because whatever's not written in the Constitution goes to the states, but the federal government can seize control of that power as well sometimes. All right? So you are going to have an assignment. I'm sorry we went a little bit late. It's a little bit of a long lesson, but we are going to go into what your assignment is for tonight. Again, you just got to finish it by the end of the night when you have a free moment. It shouldn't take you too long, so I'll show you what that looks like. So if you go to your Google Classroom, okay, if you go to your Google Classroom, and again, just to keep in mind, you have your first test on Monday. All right, so we're all kind of getting there. If you go to your Google Classroom, okay, we're taking the federal powers, the reserve powers, and the concurrent powers. And what you notice is, why I love this document is they also put the implied powers where the federal powers would also be, because over time we've developed some more federal powers and more delegated powers. Okay? So you're going to use this chart, and then what you're going to do is very simple. You're going to get a headline. Now, you're not going to be able to write on this sheet, but I'm also saying this. All I need you to tell me is if local man arrested for stealing states, if that's a federal power, excuse me. So I'll put this in the chat, okay? Is it a delegated power, a reserve power, or a concurrent power? All you're going to do, you can label it as, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 of them. So all you need to write down is 1 through 10, and just write down if it's a delegated power, reserve power, or concurrent power, and that's it. All right. Tomorrow when you come in, that's it. That's all you have to do. You could do that in your notebook. It should take you 5-6 minutes. It shouldn't take you nope, you don't need to explain why. Okay. Tomorrow you will take 8 practice multiple choice Regents questions on this. So make sure you have your notes. And this is the last thing I'll say. All right, yes, definitely do it on a doc, or you could do it in your notebook and take a photo and then just send it in that way. That's fine too. Either's fine with me. All right. But it is 11:07. All right. So again, just make sure you get this done. You have plenty of time to do it. Okay. It should take you 5 to 10 minutes. Use that chart and use what you have there to get the answer. All right. Any final questions before I let you go? All right. Any students that were not here you see in the next class, please remind them to make sure that they check out the YouTube for the assignment. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.